Before modern correctional practices, there was a time when Dorchester Penitentiary stood as one of Canada's most formidable institutions, a place built not just of stone and steel, but of the nation's early struggle to manage its most high-risk offenders. To understand its history is to step inside an era where security, discipline, and survival defined daily life. Dorchester Penitentiary, situated in New Brunswick, Canada, holds a significant place in the history of Canadian corrections. Established in 1880, it was part of the federal government's efforts to create a centralized, standardized system for managing high-risk offenders at a time when correctional facilities across the country varied widely in structure, security, and inmate management. Prior to Dorchester's establishment, many provincial prisons were little more than holding centers with minimal security and inconsistent treatment programs. The need for a federal penitentiary that could securely house the most dangerous and challenging offenders was recognized as essential to maintaining law, order, and public confidence in the criminal justice system. From its inception, Dorchester was designed to operate as a maximum security facility, a concept that was still evolving in the late 19th century. Unlike local jails, which primarily held short-term inmates or those awaiting trial, Dorchester was intended to manage individuals serving long-term sentences, including those convicted of violent crimes or repeat offenses. Its creation marked a shift toward a more formalized understanding of corrections, where the management of high-risk inmates required careful planning, secure infrastructure, and specialized procedures. In this sense, Dorchester was not merely a place of confinement, it was an experiment in the application of modern correctional theory. The penitentiary's location in Dorchester was chosen strategically. Nestled in a relatively isolated area, it minimized the risk of escape and reduced the potential for interference from outside influences. Isolation also served a practical purpose. It allowed the facility to maintain a controlled environment in which both security and discipline could be rigorously enforced. While the surrounding rural landscape provided challenges in terms of staffing and access, it ultimately contributed to the penitentiary's reputation as a high-risk, highly secure institution where order and control were paramount. From the beginning, the architecture of Dorchester reflected its maximum security mandate. The facility featured thick stone walls, barred windows, and a network of locked gates and cell blocks, designed to prevent unauthorized movement and ensure that inmates were constantly monitored. Cells were small, austere, and intended to enforce a sense of discipline and personal accountability. Unlike the reform-focused prisons being experimented with in parts of Europe, Dorchester's early design prioritized containment, reflecting the prevailing belief that high-risk offenders needed to be physically separated from society for both punishment and protection. The penitentiary was staffed with a dedicated team of correctional officers, trained to enforce strict rules and maintain order among a challenging inmate population. In the early era, the role of correctional staff was demanding and dangerous. Officers were required to navigate the tensions between maintaining discipline and preventing violent incidents, all while operating in a facility that housed some of the country's most notorious offenders. The high-risk nature of the penitentiary meant that staff training, vigilance, and operational protocols were critical. The experience of working at Dorchester often became a benchmark for officers, shaping careers and influencing correctional practices across Canada. In terms of inmate management, Dorchester's early policies reflected a blend of containment, work programs, and emerging rehabilitative ideas. Prisoners were often assigned to labor within the facility, including workshops, farming, or maintenance duties, both as a means of discipline and as a form of structured activity intended to instill routine. Although punishment was a central component of early corrections, the penitentiary's administrators began experimenting with programs that aimed to address behavior and, where possible, promote reintegration. These early efforts were cautious and limited but laid the foundation for later, more comprehensive rehabilitation programs. Dorchester Penitentiary also became known for its role in housing the highest-risk offenders from across Canada. Inmates were often transferred from provincial facilities when their behavior or security risk exceeded local capacity. This made Dorchester a central hub for federal corrections, setting standards for how dangerous offenders could be managed within a secure, centralized system. Its practices influenced the development of other federal penitentiaries, and the lessons learned from managing such a population informed broader national correctional policies. Finally, the penitentiary's early years reflected a society grappling with questions of justice, security, and rehabilitation. While the primary focus was on containment and discipline, the establishment of Dorchester Penitentiary marked an acknowledgement that certain offenders required specialized management that could not be provided in general-purpose provincial jails. Its creation was part of a broader movement toward professionalized corrections in Canada, one that sought to balance public safety with the nascent goals of reform and humane treatment within a controlled environment. In summary, Dorchester Penitentiary's origins illustrate a critical period in Canadian correctional history. As a historic maximum security facility designed to manage high-risk offenders, it represented both the challenges and ambitions of early federal corrections. Through its architecture, operational protocols, and early inmate management strategies, Dorchester set a precedent for future correctional practices, leaving a lasting legacy in Canada's penal system. The architectural design of Dorchester Penitentiary in its original high-risk era was not merely functional. It was a deliberate reflection of the correctional philosophies and security priorities of late 19th century Canada. Built as a maximum security institution, Dorchester was conceived to contain the nation's most dangerous offenders while simultaneously setting a standard for federal correctional facilities across the country. Every stone, bar, and corridor was carefully planned to ensure that both inmates and staff operated within a highly controlled environment, emphasizing order, discipline, and the prevention of escape. From the moment one approached the penitentiary, the building itself projected an image of strength, permanence, and authority. Thick, imposing stone walls surrounded the facility, rising several feet high to create both a psychological and physical barrier. These walls were designed to withstand attempts at breaching, while their sheer scale sent a clear message about the seriousness of confinement within Dorchester. Unlike smaller provincial jails that often blended into their communities, Dorchester was meant to feel formidable, isolated, and unyielding, an institution designed to control individuals deemed too high risk for local facilities. The internal layout of Dorchester reflected the latest thinking in prison architecture of the time, influenced in part by the radial and panopticon models popular in Europe. The facility consisted of multiple cell blocks arranged to maximize surveillance and limit unauthorized movement. Narrow corridors connected the blocks, allowing guards to monitor multiple areas simultaneously, while strategically placed observation posts ensured that no activity went unnoticed. This configuration emphasized visibility, control, and containment, creating a constant sense of oversight that reinforced discipline among the inmates. Inside the cell blocks, individual cells were small, austere, and highly secure, designed for solitary occupancy. Each cell was equipped with heavy doors and iron bars, limiting both physical and visual access to other areas of the facility. The walls were thick and durable, constructed to prevent tampering or escape attempts. Windows were typically narrow and placed high above ground level, allowing light and air while minimizing the opportunity for inmates to interact with the outside world. Even basic features like door locks and hinges were reinforced, reflecting a clear priority: containment above all else. Entrance and access points were another critical aspect of Dorchester's original high-security design. The main gates were heavily fortified, often with multiple layers of locks, iron grates, and controlled checkpoints. In the high-risk era, entering or exiting the facility was a complex process, requiring verification at several stages. Staff could closely monitor all movement in and out of the penitentiary, which drastically reduced the risk of escapes and unauthorized entry. The emphasis on controlled access reflected a broader philosophy. Security had to be absolute, and the architecture itself served as the first line of defense. Beyond cell blocks, Dorchester incorporated specialized areas to manage high-risk behaviors. Isolation cells and secure punishment blocks were included to separate disruptive or particularly dangerous inmates from the general population. These areas were designed to enforce discipline while minimizing the potential for conflict or violence. Workshops, exercise yards, and other facilities were carefully enclosed and monitored, allowing inmates to engage in structured activity without compromising security. Even spaces for staff movement were designed to maximize efficiency and control, ensuring that guards could respond quickly to any incident. The watchtower system was another hallmark of Dorchester's original architecture. Elevated towers provided guards with expansive views of the perimeter, exercise yards, and surrounding areas. From these vantage points, staff could detect unusual activity, prevent escape attempts, and coordinate rapid responses to disturbances. The watchtowers also had a psychological impact on inmates. The awareness of constant observation reinforced the penitentiary's strict culture of discipline and compliance. Surveillance in Dorchester was not incidental. It was embedded in every aspect of its design. In addition to its physical structures, Dorchester's security features included procedural measures integrated with architecture. For example, movement within the facility was tightly regulated through locked gates, controlled stairwells and supervised corridors. Guards were stationed at strategic points, and inmate movement was often conducted in small groups or individually. Even seemingly mundane areas such as dining halls or workshops were carefully monitored and structured to prevent altercations or escape attempts. This combination of architectural design and operational procedure created a secure environment that was difficult to challenge. Finally, Dorchester's original high-security design reflects the broader philosophy of Canadian corrections at the time. The penitentiary was built during an era when containment, discipline, and order were paramount, and rehabilitation was still in its early stages. The architecture itself was an instrument of control, communicating authority, and establishing boundaries that shaped inmate behavior. It was not simply a building, it was a carefully engineered environment in which security dictated every decision, from cell size to corridor width, from window placement to gate design. In summary, Dorchester Penitentiary's architectural structure and high-security features in its original era were a product of careful planning, strict philosophy, and a response to the challenges of managing Canada's most dangerous offenders. From its imposing stone walls to its watchtowers, reinforced cells, and controlled access points, the facility represented the pinnacle of correctional security at the time. Its design not only ensured containment but also established a standard for future maximum security institutions, leaving a lasting legacy in the history of Canadian corrections. From its inception in 1880, Dorchester Penitentiary was established not just as a place of confinement, but as a specialized facility designed to house Canada's most high-risk offenders. Unlike provincial jails, which primarily managed local criminals serving short-term sentences or awaiting trial, Dorchester was a federal penitentiary with a mandate to contain individuals who posed serious threats to society, were prone to escape, or had histories of violent behavior. Understanding the composition of its inmate population during the original high-risk era offers a window into both the operational philosophy of the penitentiary and the broader social and criminal justice context of late 19th and early 20th century Canada. The inmates sent to Dorchester in its early years were carefully selected based on risk and behavior, often transferred from provincial jails that lacked the capacity or security to manage them effectively. Many were convicted of violent crimes including murder, assault, and armed robbery, and were considered too dangerous for general population facilities. Others were repeat offenders who had demonstrated patterns of escape attempts, disruptive behavior, or extreme non-compliance with institutional rules. By centralizing such individuals in a single high-security institution, Dorchester served as a national repository for the most challenging inmates, allowing other facilities to maintain order while concentrating expertise and resources in a specialized environment. In addition to violent offenders, Dorchester housed individuals whose crimes or behavior were perceived as particularly destabilizing to prison operations. This included inmates who were leaders of prison gangs, those involved in smuggling or contraband, or prisoners who were considered highly manipulative or resistant to authority. The penitentiary's administrators recognized that certain inmates had an outsized impact on the morale and security of other prisoners, and Dorchester's design and staffing levels were structured to mitigate these risks. In this sense, the facility operated as both a containment strategy and a behavioral management tool, segregating high-risk individuals from the general inmate population. Demographically, the early population at Dorchester reflected the patterns of crime and sentencing in Canada at the time. Most inmates were adult males, as men were disproportionately convicted of the violent and high-risk offenses that the penitentiary was designed to contain. While women were generally housed in separate facilities, occasional transfers occurred if a female inmate was deemed particularly dangerous or disruptive. In terms of age, the majority of inmates were young to middle-aged adults, often in their 20s to 40s, representing a cohort most likely to engage in violent behavior or escape attempts. Socioeconomic background also played a role. Many inmates came from disadvantaged communities, reflecting broader social inequalities and patterns of criminalization. The penitentiary's population was also ethnically diverse, a reflection of Canada's immigration patterns during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. While the majority were of European descent, there were inmates from indigenous communities and other minority groups, often reflecting systemic social and economic marginalization. This diversity sometimes introduced additional challenges in managing interpersonal dynamics within the facility, as cultural differences, prejudices, and misunderstandings could exacerbate tensions in the high-risk environment. Another significant feature of Dorchester's early population was the prevalence of long-term sentences. Unlike local jails where inmates served months or a few years, Dorchester frequently housed individuals serving sentences of decades or even life terms. These long-term sentences were a defining characteristic of maximum security facilities, as they required careful planning for daily routines, work assignments, and opportunities for structured activity to reduce idleness and potential violence. Managing a long-term population added complexity to both security and rehabilitation efforts, demanding sophisticated oversight and consistent enforcement of rules. Behavioral management was a constant concern. The penitentiary had to contend with inmates who were not only physically dangerous but also psychologically challenging. Some prisoners exhibited extreme aggression, while others engaged in manipulative or disruptive behavior designed to test institutional authority. Staff had to understand and respond to these behaviors, using a combination of observation, structured routines, and strict disciplinary measures. Inmates' past behavior was a key determinant in how they were classified, monitored, and assigned within the penitentiary, reflecting an early attempt at individualized risk management within a high-security context. Finally, the inmate population of Dorchester Penitentiary during the high-risk era played a central role in shaping the institution's identity and operational philosophy. The facility was built to contain those whom society deemed most dangerous, and the types of individuals it housed reinforced the penitentiary's reputation as a place of strict control, rigorous security, and serious consequences for misconduct. Over time, the experience of managing such a population informed broader Canadian correctional policies, including classification systems, security protocols, and approaches to inmate labor and rehabilitation. Dorchester became not only a high-security prison but also a laboratory for understanding and managing high-risk behavior in a controlled environment. In summary, the early inmate population at Dorchester Penitentiary was defined by danger, risk, and complexity. Violent offenders, repeat criminals, manipulative individuals, and long-term prisoners all contributed to a challenging and demanding environment that shaped both the physical and operational structure of the institution. By concentrating Canada's most difficult offenders in one facility, Dorchester set a precedent for maximum security corrections and played a crucial role in the evolution of the federal penitentiary system. Life inside Dorchester Penitentiary during its original high-risk era was defined by strict routines, rigorous discipline, and emerging ideas about rehabilitation. For inmates sent to Canada's maximum security facility, daily life was highly structured, designed to enforce order, maintain security, and, where possible, instill a sense of accountability. Understanding the day-to-day experience behind the walls reveals not only the challenges faced by prisoners but also the correctional philosophies that guided administrators in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. From the moment inmates awoke, their schedules were tightly controlled. Mornings typically began early with roll calls to account for every prisoner and ensure compliance with rules. The penitentiary staff maintained a meticulous system of supervision, monitoring both movement and behavior throughout the day. Inmates were expected to adhere strictly to regulations governing their attire, conduct, and participation in assigned activities. Deviations from routine were met with swift disciplinary measures, reflecting a broader philosophy that structure and predictability were central to controlling a high-risk population. Work was a central component of daily life in Dorchester. Inmates were assigned to various labor programs within the facility, including maintenance, cleaning, workshops, farming, and other forms of productive activity. These tasks served multiple purposes. Practically, they contributed to the operation and upkeep of the penitentiary, reducing operational costs and creating a self-sustaining environment. Psychologically, structured work was believed to instill discipline, provide purpose, and reduce idleness, an essential factor in managing the behavior of a population often prone to aggression and unrest. Work routines were carefully supervised, with guards monitoring both productivity and adherence to rules. Meals and recreation were also highly regulated. Dining occurred in communal halls or designated spaces, but movement within these areas was strictly controlled. Guards oversaw every aspect of mealtime, ensuring that interactions between inmates did not escalate into violence or disorder. Recreational periods, although limited, were incorporated into the schedule to provide physical activity and mental diversion. Exercise yards were enclosed and monitored, and even recreational activities were structured to minimize conflict. While these provisions may appear austere by modern standards, they reflected the early understanding that routine and controlled activity were critical to maintaining stability in a maximum security environment. Discipline in Dorchester was enforced through a combination of formal rules, punishment systems, and behavioral observation. Inmates who violated regulations could be subjected to solitary confinement, restricted privileges, or other forms of correction intended to reinforce authority and compliance. These measures were not intended as arbitrary cruelty but as essential tools for managing a population that included some of the nation's most dangerous offenders. Guards were trained to recognize behavioral patterns, anticipate potential incidents, and apply disciplinary measures consistently to maintain order and prevent escalation. Despite the emphasis on containment and discipline, Dorchester also experimented with early forms of rehabilitation, although these were limited compared to modern standards. Educational programs, vocational training, and structured work assignments were introduced gradually to provide inmates with skills that might support reintegration upon release. Literacy classes, basic arithmetic, and craft skills were offered in some cases, reflecting a growing recognition that correctional institutions could serve a dual purpose: punishment and preparation for eventual reintegration into society. However, these programs were secondary to the primary goals of security and containment, and participation often depended on good behavior and compliance with rules. Mental health and psychological well-being were beginning to emerge as considerations, though understanding at the time was rudimentary. Administrators recognized that high-risk offenders often exhibited behavioral patterns linked to psychological stress or instability. Efforts were made to provide structured activity, supervision, and in some cases counseling or guidance, though these were limited by staffing, resources, and prevailing attitudes about crime and punishment. Nonetheless, these early interventions laid the groundwork for more comprehensive rehabilitation initiatives that would evolve in later decades. The daily life of Dorchester inmates was also shaped by interpersonal dynamics and social hierarchy. Even within a strictly controlled environment, prisoners formed informal networks and hierarchies based on influence, reputation, and behavior. Correctional staff were keenly aware of these dynamics, as conflicts or alliances among inmates could impact security. Managing these relationships required constant observation, strategic placement of individuals within cell blocks, and careful scheduling of work and recreation to minimize tensions. The penitentiary's routine and structure were tools not only for enforcing discipline but also for controlling social interactions that could destabilize the facility. Finally, it is important to note that the daily life of inmates at Dorchester Penitentiary reflected the broader philosophy of corrections in the era. Security and discipline were paramount, but administrators increasingly recognized that structured activity, work, and limited rehabilitative efforts could contribute to safer, more manageable operations. The penitentiary was not merely a place of punishment, it was an environment carefully engineered to balance containment with attempts, however modest, at reform. The routines, rules, and programs were all designed to create predictability, reduce conflict, and foster an environment in which even high-risk individuals could be managed within the confines of a maximum security institution. In summary, daily life behind the walls of Dorchester Penitentiary in the original high-risk era was defined by structure, discipline, and cautious experimentation with rehabilitation. Inmates experienced a highly regulated existence, from early morning roll calls to assigned work, controlled recreation, and strict enforcement of rules. While punishment and containment were primary, early educational, vocational, and behavioral programs reflected an evolving philosophy that sought to balance security with the potential for reform. This structured daily life not only maintained order but also shaped the institution's identity as a model of maximum security corrections in Canada. Dorchester Penitentiary's early history as a maximum security institution was marked not only by its imposing architecture and rigorous routines but also by the constant challenges of maintaining security in a high-risk environment. The penitentiary was designed to house the most dangerous and unpredictable offenders in Canada, and the combination of violent personalities, long-term sentences, and evolving operational procedures created a setting in which security was both complex and critical. Examining these challenges and notable incidents from the original high-risk era provides insight into the facility's operational philosophy and the lengths to which staff went to maintain control. One of the central security challenges at Dorchester was the risk of escape. Despite thick walls, reinforced cell doors, and controlled access points, inmates continually tested the facility's defenses. Escape attempts ranged from small-scale efforts, such as tampering with locks or attempting to scale walls, to more organized schemes involving tools or cooperation between inmates. Each attempt highlighted the ingenuity and determination of the prison population, as well as the need for constant vigilance and rapid response from staff. Over time, these attempts prompted improvements in both infrastructure and operational protocols, including tighter locking systems, enhanced watchtower monitoring, and stricter control over inmate movement. Violence and interpersonal conflict were another persistent security challenge. The high-risk population included individuals prone to aggression, manipulation, and intimidation, which sometimes led to fights, assaults, or challenges to staff authority. Guards needed to be trained not only in physical control techniques but also in understanding inmate psychology and social dynamics. Strategies such as segregation of aggressive individuals, careful cell assignment, and structured work and recreational periods were developed to reduce the likelihood of violent incidents. Even with these measures, staff had to respond swiftly and decisively whenever conflicts arose, balancing authority with the safety of all inmates. Dorchester also faced challenges related to contraband and unauthorized communication. Items such as weapons, tools, or even illicit messages could endanger both staff and inmates. The original high-risk era saw the implementation of rigorous inspection procedures, controlled deliveries of goods, and constant monitoring of interactions within the facility. Guards conducted frequent searches of cells, workshops, and common areas, ensuring that attempts to smuggle items or plan illicit activities were detected and addressed promptly. These security measures reflected an understanding that control extended beyond physical containment to include oversight of information, relationships, and behavior. Several notable incidents occurred during Dorchester's early years, demonstrating both the risks inherent in managing a maximum security population and the facility's response capabilities. While detailed records of each event are scarce, historical accounts describe escape attempts that tested the penitentiary's defenses, altercations between inmates that required rapid intervention, and disturbances in workshops or exercise yards that threatened overall stability. Each incident served as a learning opportunity for administrators, informing the development of policies and procedures that would enhance security while maintaining order. Importantly, these events reinforced the perception of Dorchester as a facility where high-risk offenders were managed with vigilance and discipline. The penitentiary also contended with the challenges posed by long-term confinement. Inmates serving decades or life sentences often experience frustration, boredom, and psychological stress, which could manifest in attempts to disrupt the institution or test boundaries. Administrators recognized that maintaining security required more than physical barriers. It necessitated a careful balance of structure, activity, and oversight. Programs such as vocational training, supervised labor, and limited recreation were integrated not only to promote rehabilitation but also to mitigate the risk of unrest stemming from prolonged confinement. By keeping inmates engaged and monitored, Dorchester aimed to reduce tension and prevent incidents that could compromise security. Staffing challenges also impacted security. Managing a high-risk population required sufficient numbers of well-trained correctional officers, clear communication, and effective coordination. The early era saw the development of standardized protocols for patrols, cell inspections, and emergency responses. Guards had to be alert to subtle signs of tension or planning, often relying on observation, experience, and intuition to anticipate problems before they escalated. The demanding nature of the work meant that staff were continually tested, both physically and mentally, by the pressures of maintaining safety in an environment where risks were ever present. Additionally, Dorchester's geographic isolation, while beneficial in preventing escapes, presented logistical challenges during emergencies. Rapid response from external authorities was limited, making internal preparedness critical. Staff were trained to manage disturbances independently until additional support could arrive, further emphasizing the importance of vigilance, discipline, and coordination in daily operations. Despite these challenges, Dorchester Penitentiary developed a reputation for resilience and effective control. The facility's response to security incidents, combined with its ongoing improvements in architecture, staffing, and procedures, established a framework for managing high-risk offenders that influenced other federal penitentiaries. Lessons learned during these early years, whether regarding escape prevention, violent behavior management, or operational coordination, formed the foundation of modern maximum security practices in Canada. In summary, the security challenges and notable incidents of Dorchester Penitentiary's high-risk era underscore the complexity of managing a population composed of violent, unpredictable, and long-term offenders. Escape attempts, interpersonal conflicts, contraband issues, and the psychological stresses of long sentences required constant vigilance and innovation. The penitentiary's staff, architecture, and operational strategies evolved in response, creating a secure and disciplined environment that became a benchmark for maximum security corrections. These early experiences shaped both the institution's identity and Canada's broader approach to high-risk offender management, leaving a legacy that extended far beyond the walls of Dorchester. The operation of Dorchester Penitentiary during its original high-risk era relied not only on its imposing architecture and strict routines but also on the dedication, skill, and resilience of its correctional staff. Working in a historic maximum security facility presented unique challenges that required physical courage, mental acuity, and an unwavering commitment to maintaining order under conditions of constant risk. Understanding the experience of staff during this period provides insight into the human element of corrections and the demanding environment in which Canada's most dangerous offenders were managed. From the outset, correctional officers at Dorchester were tasked with managing a population of high-risk inmates, many of whom were violent, unpredictable, and highly manipulative. Officers needed to be constantly alert to the behaviors and moods of those in their care, anticipating potential disruptions before they escalated into violence or escape attempts. The high stakes meant that even minor lapses in attention could have serious consequences, and the responsibility for maintaining safety extended not only to the staff themselves but also to fellow inmates. This atmosphere of vigilance demanded a combination of physical presence, psychological insight, and adherence to strict procedural protocols. Training and preparation were central to the role of staff, though in the early years formalized correctional training was limited. Much of the knowledge required to manage high-risk offenders was acquired on the job, often through mentorship from more experienced officers and through direct observation of inmate behavior. Guards learned how to de-escalate tense situations, enforce rules without provoking resistance, and use authority to maintain order in an environment where respect had to be earned, not demanded. Over time, Dorchester became a site where best practices for managing maximum security populations were developed, and officers were considered highly skilled professionals within the correctional system. The physical demands of the job were significant. Officers patrolled long corridors, supervised labor and recreational areas, and maintained a constant presence in cell blocks where confrontations could erupt at any moment. Shifts were long and often monotonous, yet the potential for sudden emergencies, such as fights, attempted escapes, or contraband discoveries, required readiness at all times. The work environment was tense, requiring both endurance and the ability to respond decisively in critical moments. Even routine tasks such as conducting cell inspections or managing movement through the facility had to be approached with caution and precision to prevent incidents. Staff also faced psychological challenges unique to a high-risk setting. The nature of the inmate population, combined with the isolation of the penitentiary and the demands of constant supervision, could contribute to stress, anxiety, and fatigue. Officers had to balance firmness with fairness, avoiding favoritism or unnecessary harshness while maintaining authority. The mental resilience required to navigate daily tensions, potential threats, and the emotional weight of working with individuals who often had histories of violence or trauma cannot be overstated. The penitentiary environment tested not only physical stamina but also emotional stability and decision-making under pressure. Interpersonal skills were as important as physical and procedural capabilities. Correctional officers at Dorchester had to communicate effectively with both inmates and colleagues, building working relationships that minimized conflict while ensuring compliance with institutional rules. They were required to observe subtle cues in inmate behavior, mediate disputes, and enforce disciplinary measures consistently to maintain credibility and order. Teamwork among staff was critical. Coordination, mutual trust, and shared vigilance ensured that no single officer was left exposed to risk and that security was upheld throughout the facility. Another key aspect of staff experience was exposure to emergencies and high-risk incidents. Officers were trained to respond to violent outbreaks, medical emergencies, and escape attempts, often relying on quick judgment and decisive action. These high-pressure situations could be dangerous and physically demanding, underscoring the importance of situational awareness and the ability to act under stress. The staff's response to such events shaped both the safety of the institution and its reputation as a secure, well-managed facility. Staff also played a role in early rehabilitative efforts, supervising educational programs, vocational training, and structured labor activities. While the primary focus of Dorchester was security and containment, officers facilitated programs designed to provide inmates with skills and routines that could support eventual reintegration. This required patience, consistency, and the ability to maintain control while allowing for meaningful engagement, a delicate balance that tested the professional skill of correctional staff. Finally, the experience of working at Dorchester Penitentiary in the high-risk era left a lasting legacy for Canada's correctional system. Officers gained unique expertise in managing violent and complex inmate populations, developing protocols, techniques, and operational insights that informed broader practices across federal penitentiaries. The demands of the job, from physical vigilance to psychological resilience, shaped the professional identity of correctional staff and highlighted the critical human element in maintaining secure and orderly institutions. In summary, the staff experience at Dorchester Penitentiary was defined by risk, responsibility, and professional skill. Officers navigated the challenges of supervising dangerous, long-term offenders while enforcing strict routines, responding to emergencies, and facilitating early rehabilitation efforts. The work demanded a combination of physical stamina, psychological resilience, and interpersonal acumen. Their dedication and expertise were essential to the safe operation of one of Canada's most formidable maximum security facilities and laid the foundation for modern practices in high-risk corrections. Dorchester Penitentiary's early history as a high-risk maximum security facility left an indelible mark on Canada's correctional system. While its original era was defined by strict containment, rigid routines, and the management of the nation's most dangerous offenders, the evolution of societal attitudes toward crime and punishment gradually shaped a transition toward more modern correctional practices. This transformation reflects both the lessons learned from Dorchester's early operations and the broader shift in philosophy from punitive isolation to the inclusion of rehabilitation and reintegration strategies. During the late 20th century, the correctional system began to emphasize rehabilitation alongside security, recognizing that long-term public safety depended not only on containing offenders but also on preparing them for reintegration into society. Dorchester, with its long history of managing high-risk inmates, became a case study in both the challenges and opportunities of maximum security operations. Administrators and policymakers drew on decades of experience at Dorchester to understand the limitations of purely punitive approaches and the potential benefits of structured programming, vocational training, and behavioral interventions. One key aspect of this transition was the reassessment of inmate classification and risk management. In the original high-risk era, inmates were often categorized primarily by offense type or perceived danger, leading to strict segregation and minimal interaction. Over time, correctional authorities adopted more sophisticated classification systems that considered psychological assessment, behavioral history, and rehabilitative needs. Dorchester played a role in shaping these systems, as administrators observed patterns of behavior, response to interventions, and the impact of long-term confinement on high-risk populations. The facility's historical experience provided valuable insight into how to balance security with the potential for behavioral improvement. The physical infrastructure of Dorchester also underwent adaptation to support modern practices. While the original stone walls, secure gates, and reinforced cell blocks remained central to containment, newer areas were modified or supplemented to accommodate educational programs, vocational workshops, and recreational facilities. Spaces that were once purely punitive were transformed to encourage structured activity and engagement, reflecting a broader belief that safe, secure, and rehabilitative environments could coexist. These changes demonstrated that even a facility with a deeply entrenched high-risk identity could evolve to meet contemporary correctional goals. Staff roles and training similarly evolved. Correctional officers, once primarily focused on surveillance, discipline, and containment, began to incorporate skills related to rehabilitation, conflict resolution, and mental health awareness. The lessons learned from managing high-risk inmates at Dorchester informed training programs across the federal system, highlighting the importance of communication, observation, and individualized approaches to inmate behavior. Officers were expected to maintain security while also supporting programs that encouraged personal development, creating a dual role that required both authority and empathy. Despite these changes, the legacy of Dorchester's high-risk years continued to influence the penitentiary's identity and operations. The emphasis on discipline, rigorous routines, and operational vigilance remained integral, ensuring that even as rehabilitative programs expanded, the facility retained its capability to manage dangerous individuals effectively. The historical experiences, escape attempts, violent incidents, and the challenges of long-term confinement served as ongoing reminders of the potential risks inherent in maximum security corrections and the need for careful oversight. Dorchester's evolution also contributed to national correctional policy and philosophy. Lessons from its high-risk era informed approaches to inmate classification, facility design, and staff training in other institutions. The penitentiary became a benchmark for understanding the balance between containment and rehabilitation, demonstrating that secure management and reformative efforts were not mutually exclusive. This dual approach influenced federal penitentiary standards, encouraging a system-wide shift toward evidence-based practices and professionalized correctional management. Another important aspect of the transition was the recognition of mental health and social needs within the inmate population. While early operations focused almost exclusively on physical security and discipline, modern correctional practices acknowledged the impact of psychological well-being, social skills, and personal development on institutional safety and long-term outcomes. Programs addressing anger management, addiction, education, and vocational training were gradually introduced, reflecting a holistic approach to managing high-risk individuals. Dorchester's historical experience provided critical insight into how these interventions could be integrated without compromising security. The cultural memory of Dorchester's high-risk era also played a role in shaping contemporary attitudes toward corrections. Staff, administrators, and policymakers who had experienced or studied the early operational challenges understood the intensity, complexity, and risks involved in maximum security management. This awareness fostered respect for professional correctional practice and informed decisions about infrastructure investment, staffing levels, and operational procedures. The lessons learned became part of the institutional ethos, ensuring that historical knowledge guided modern practice rather than being forgotten. In summary, Dorchester Penitentiary's transition from a historic high-risk maximum security institution to a facility incorporating modern correctional practices reflects both continuity and change. Its legacy lies not only in the strict routines, discipline, and security measures developed during its early era but also in the influence these experiences had on rehabilitation, policy, and operational philosophy. By integrating structured programs, refined classification systems, and staff training into a secure framework, Dorchester demonstrated that maximum security institutions could evolve to meet contemporary correctional goals while retaining their capacity to manage dangerous offenders. The penitentiary's high-risk history remains a vital part of Canada's correctional heritage, offering enduring lessons about the balance between security, discipline, and the potential for reform.